Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our session this afternoon on Just Transition to Zero Waste Cities, a key strategy to deliver the Paris Agreement. Thanks for being here and joining us this afternoon. My name is Froilan Grate. I'm the Asia Pacific Coordinator for GAIA. GAIA is a network of more than 600 organizations in 92 countries working on waste, climate, and other environmental justice issues. Special thanks to UNFCCC Observers Ecology Center, Curtin University, Surfers Against Sewage, Toxic Link, and RAP UK for co-hosting this session with us this afternoon. Increasing greenhouse gas emissions in cities from 60% in 2000 to 67% in 2015 can be greatly reduced through just transition strategies towards circular and zero-waste local economies. Our amazing panelists this afternoon will reflect on zero-waste strategies that can be implemented in cities and beyond to reduce waste and associated greenhouse gas emissions to help us achieve the Paris Agreement emission targets. In particular, emphasis will be made on local strategies to reduce food waste and improve organic waste management as a key strategy for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The panel will also underscore measures that support a just transition for workers and vulnerable communities. To those of you joining us via live stream, you can join the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag #ZeroWasteToZeroEmission. You can also ask questions here, and members of our team will be tracking and will be asking your questions to our panelists later. I'm honored to introduce and start with our first speaker for this afternoon. Our first speaker is Minister George Heyman. Minister Heyman is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for the province of British Columbia. Minister Heyman has led provincial response to climate change through the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030, one of the strongest climate and clean economy plans in North America, as well as BC's climate preparedness and adaptation strategy. He has previously served as Executive Director of Sierra Club BC, one of the province's oldest environmental advocacy and education organizations. Minister Heyman.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for being here this afternoon. It is an intense conference, but it's an intense topic generally. I want to begin by thanking the Egyptian people who are our hosts here for so many days and have done such a wonderful job of trying to make us all welcome, as well as create a conference that matches the ambition that we need. It's important, I think, for us to make connections in many ways, and many people are concerned about climate change, many other people are concerned about waste, and yet others are concerned about plastic pollution, and somehow don't always make the connections that they are one issue, that reducing waste is critical to reducing emissions on the planet, as well as to help meet our climate objectives. I just completed a meeting before I came here with the president of Andalusia in Spain, and we talked about their very aggressive zero waste management plan, as well as their organics plan. That's what's so great about COP. The fact that people come together to learn from each other, like panels that, such as this one, in side conversations, in bilateral meetings. And we not only learn from each other and exchange information, but we also have the advantage of being inspired by each other. Even for those of us who come here from neighboring jurisdictions, we have the opportunity to engage in friendly rivalries where we can try to leapfrog each other in both ambitions and actions. So we're going to hear in this panel about some of the fantastic actions taking place in different nations around the world, and there will be opportunities to learn. Let me briefly say, in British Columbia, in addition to having a multifaceted emission reduction plan across all sectors of society, whether it's transportation, buildings and communities, industry and oil and gas to try to meet meaningful emission reduction targets that will align with the Paris Agreement. We also have a long-standing commitment to ensuring that we reduce waste in a variety of ways. We have the oldest extended producer responsibility recycling program in North America, and we are looking to expand it on a regular basis, but expand it responsibly by making sure that we truly are recycling and have the facilities to recycle the material we collect, not simply shipping it somewhere else where it will become waste. We also are focusing on ability to take materials that are at their end of initial life and repurpose and reuse them for other measures. I just visited this summer an electric vehicle battery recycling facility in the interior of our province where they are extending the life of batteries rather than having it become a toxic waste. We're passing legislation in my province to enable local government to ban the use of single-use plastics, to ban the use of plastic bags, and we're also taking that action across the province to bring some uniformity. In doing that, we're also paying attention to the health impacts where some plastics are unavoidable, as well as ensuring that people with diverse abilities aren't deprived of some of the things that they may legitimately need to use until there are alternatives for them to use to the plastic products that are so ubiquitous today. We also launched a plastic cleanup plan along our coasts. What we see in cities far too often is a great accumulation of debris and waste, often plastic waste, that ends up in our oceans. It impacts marine life as well as causing emissions and toxins when they break down, and they travel with the ocean currents around the world. When I've participated in beach cleanups, I've been stunned by the amount of material that I find pushed up beyond the high tide line, simply disintegrating and breaking down. We have cleaned up many derelict vessels. We've cleaned up 400 kilometers of coastline in our province, a couple of thousand tons of plastic debris, and we are recycling over 2/3 of that. And in doing that, we're also providing grants and incentives to small companies with new technologies to take the plastic that we collect and recycle and return and reuse it into new products. The circular economy, the reduction and elimination of waste in cities is a critical part of our path toward a cleaner future, toward a low carbon and low emission future. So I know that in listening to the panel today, you are going to hear many new ideas, many initiatives. I hope we all take those ideas home and we're inspired in our ability and our determination to apply those as quickly as possible as we're fighting and tackling climate change. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Minister Heyman. Indeed, we need to build the connections in all of the issues that we are working on. And unfortunately, Minister Heyman will not be able to join us more than this time. We understand you have a full packed schedule, but thank you so much for sharing all the amazing work that you're doing in British Columbia. Now we can go to our panel for this afternoon, and I'm very privileged to be sharing this table with these amazing folks here who I greatly admire and who are doing amazing work in their places. So I'd like to introduce each one of them, and then after these introductions, they each will share the work that they're doing and their answers to some of the questions we'll be raising. We've arranged them according to regions, so we have speakers from Africa, from Europe, and then from Asia Pacific. And after each one of them has shared their stories and the work that they're doing, we'll have a space for question and answer. So please ready your questions after. And again, for those who are following this conversation online, you may join the conversation by using the hashtag #ZeroWaste to Zero Emission. Our first panelist for this afternoon is Anna Rocha. Anna is a zero waste implementer and plastic activist who believes that it is mandatory for us to recognize the inequality of the world that we live in, using solidarity to fill historical gaps, providing vulnerable groups with meaningful opportunities, and ensuring that social justice walks together with environmental stewardship. Anna actively advocates for plastic reduction from production to disposal to achieve climate balance. She participates in local, regional, and global networks, bringing African and Latin American inputs to global conversations and pursuing equality of opportunities in environmental activism in the Global South. Anna is the Executive Director of Nipe Fagio in Tanzania. Nipe Fagio is, Give Me the Broom in Swahili, is a civil society organization founded in 2013. Our second speaker is Hlatshwayo. Luyanda is a reclaimer based in South Africa. He is a director and founding member of the African Reclaimers Organization and coordinator of the International Alliance of Waste Pickers in Africa. He heads the Separation at Source program in Johannesburg, works in business development, and is an educator in the waste space. Our third speaker from Europe is Iryna Myronova. She is the executive director of Zero Waste Lviv and founding member of Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine. She received an MS in Ecology and Environmental Protection at the National University of Kiev Mohyla Academy and a professional certificate in environmental policy from the Bard Center for Environmental Policy. Iryna has 15 years of professional experience as a sustainability manager and business consultant and as corporate engagement officer at the World Wildlife Fund Ukraine. She is a member of the Environmental Board of PLAST, a national scouting organization of Ukraine. Our fourth speaker, also from Europe, is Dr. Richard Swannel. Dr. Richard is an environmental scientist with a strong track record of leading teams which tackle plastic pollution, reduce food waste, and deliver more sustainable practices within businesses. He is the international director at RAP, working with partners in over 40 countries to deliver systemic change, particularly within food system. RAP is a not-for-profit organization based in the UK, which aims to tackle climate change and cut waste around the world. And our last panelist, joining me from the Asia-Pacific region, is Dr. Atiq Zaman. He is currently working as a senior lecturer at the School of Design and the Built Environment, Faculty of Humanities, Curtin University in Western Australia. He is also a researcher at the Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute and the course coordinator of the Master of Environment and Climate Emergency Program. He is one of the founding co-directors of the Global South Nexus Research Cluster at DBE. Since 2002, Dr. Zaman has been working as the Curtin node leader for the Sustainable Community and Waste Hub funded by the Commonwealth Government. Again, amazing group of panelists, and I'm very excited to share the stage at this table with you and hear what you will be sharing with all of us this afternoon. So for our first panel, let's go first to Africa. Let's go with Anna. So Anna, how are cities in Tanzania using zero waste to achieve their climate goals, and what are the highlights of the work in Dar es Salaam?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to present to you a little bit of what we are doing in Tanzania. We have a zero waste model being implemented in Tanzania with quite exciting results that we are able even to amplify and scale. So when you think about Tanzania, what we are thinking, when you think about waste management in Tanzania and waste mismanagement specifically, we are talking about a systemic problem. Okay, so we have a lack of collection, lack of waste management services for the communities, and specifically for low-income communities. For several reasons, but one of them is also structural reasons. So if you see the way that the neighborhoods are there and how they are formed, it's not necessarily easy, for example, for a truck to be able to service those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And so we have been implementing a zero waste model focusing on basically solving the systemic problem by giving a systemic solution to it. And I'm not going to go over all the numbers that are on this slide. But basically what I would like to highlight here is that with a proper zero waste model being implemented that is led by a cooperative that is able to reach the households and provide a reliable service, we have been able to, for the past 4 years, reduce the amount of waste that we need to take to the dump site. We don't have a landfill in Dar es Salaam, so it's a dump site, by 75%. And 93% of the population of the low-income neighborhoods are actually there engaging and segregating waste at source and participating. One number that is not there, but is a very important number, especially when it comes to the discussions that we are having about the climate, is that waste is actually the main contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Tanzania. And so we are talking about a country in which so the official number will say that 49% of all the waste that is being produced is organic waste. My experience and the experience of the organization that I work at gives us a 75% of all the waste that we collect from low-income neighborhoods is organic waste. And the way that, as we are talking about the systemic problem, the way that that things are happening now is that organic waste is basically mixed with everything else and goes to the dump site or is dumped somewhere. And that generates a lot of methane emissions, which is obviously a problem for the climate crisis that we are living in. And so we are trying to solve this problem. And what this study in the report shows is that we can basically reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam specifically, which is the focus of the report, by 65% by implementing the zero waste model across the city. And this is a very exciting number, 65%, and that comes together with a reduction of annual residual waste of 59%, and then landfill methane emissions by 47%. And so we are talking about a solution that actually solves a problem that the communities have, which is the lack of waste management services, and also solves a problem that we have globally, which is the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate crisis. Next. So how does that zero waste model work? We basically have a cooperative that delivers door-to-door collection services. We have communities doing segregation at source, and then we have a decentralization of waste management with material recovery facilities being built for each one of the engaged communities. The pictures can show a little bit of that to give you a feeling of how it works. Next slide, please. And basically everything that can be recycled is then stored so that we can send it to recycling companies, local recycling companies. We produce compost at the local level, so the neighborhoods are producing compost from the organic waste that they are producing. We also use black soldier flies, which I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with, but basically it produces a larva that is very rich in protein and very suitable for chicken feed or for fish as well. And so the communities also really appreciate that. And then we only store on a side place all the residual waste. And that's the residual waste is basically what we cannot do anything with. That's actually waste that shouldn't be produced in the first place. And it's a lot of single-use plastic and similar things that we then advocate for restrictions, for policy restrictions, so that the companies stop producing those. Next, please. So with that, what I would like to say is basically that we need, when you have a systemic problem, a systemic challenge, what we need to search for is systemic change. We need a systemic solution. And when we think about the climate crisis and the just transition that we are talking about, we need to create conditions for social justice. If you look at the neighborhoods that I just showed in the pictures, one of the things that you see is that we are talking about communities that have been neglected historically. And when we have the climate crisis, they are also the first ones to be affected by the floods, by the intense heat, and that have less ways to mitigate the effects of those in their lives. And so when we talk about zero waste implementation, what we are talking about is a whole system that addresses that historical gap that we have, produce the conditions for social justice, and then promotes a just economy in the African context, being done in a way that matches the local circumstances. This zero waste model is being used in Tanzania, is being implemented in Tanzania, but it could also expand to other countries in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that have very similar conditions. And we can have very significant results from that. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. You've mentioned a lot of amazing numbers, and I'd like to just highlight 3 of them. Number 1, it's amazing the amount of change that could happen in less than 4 years, as you've mentioned. And this is given despite the limitations because of COVID. And imagine the amount of change that we can see if only investments are made into zero waste in Africa and across Global South countries. Second, I'm amazed by the 93% compliance at the waste segregation in the programs that you're implementing in Africa. The common narrative that we hear is that we in the Global South, we in poorer nations, can't be bothered in doing what is right. But what we're seeing here is that if given the right systems, people actually do comply, right? And third, as you've mentioned, organics in some communities comprises about 75% of the waste that's being produced, And if we just invest in local solutions like composting, imagine the amount of greenhouse gases that we're able to prevent from being generated. So there's so much potential here, and we'd love to hear more of these stories. Next, we go now to Luyanda. Luyanda, I have 3 questions for you. How can government support waste sector workers in the transition to zero waste? And how is waste picker inclusion key to building zero waste cities, especially in your experience in South Africa? And what are the practical, sustainable solutions happening on the ground? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the interesting topic. Thank you very much for the interesting topic. I think let's start with the practical things that are happening on the ground and the facts. There's about 10 million waste pickers in South Africa who are collecting about 80% of what is currently being recycled. That means we've got a proper working system on the ground that we haven't really looked at in terms of supporting it. If we're to look at our first slide, this is in a community in Johannesburg where we've got 23 informal people collecting about 3.3 tons of recyclable on a weekly basis in one community, with no infrastructure support, with no financial support. And how are they doing it? They are organizing. Waste pickers are organizing communities, organizing schools, organizing around waste. And why is that happening? Because there's value in waste. And there's no jobs in South Africa. So you've got a very big number of the informal sector that have seen the value in waking up in the morning, collecting and cleaning our communities on a daily basis. Now we're talking about everyday environmental agents. I call them the last line of defense. Not people that are environmental agents once a year on World Environmental Day. These are people that are doing it on a daily basis. They've taken up the job of saying, we need to start educating. We need to start showing people exactly what we're doing. There's a huge stigma that goes around the work because we're not as clean as everyone. Some people wake up in the morning and they look nice with the tie. I can't wear a tie to work. I look very dirty. Some of us actually wear balaclavas and you look like a criminal. And if you were to start engaging with us, we'll tell you the reason why I'm wearing a balaclava is because your waste stinks. You're not separating your waste. So we've started doing those programs on the ground of educating communities, educating everyone within our space on how do you separate waste, how do you manage your waste. And all of this, let me remind you, is not funded. This is all actions that are happening on the ground by reclaimers. Education programs, something that everyone is not looking at. We need to start from the beginning and start educating at an early age the values and the importance of how do we treat waste. Not on how do we solve the problem, but how do we make sure that we don't create the problem. And starting from educating children at a young age, we are already doing it. It's not something that we want to do, it's already happening. And that's happening in a lot of cities in Africa. Can I have the next slide? Problems. With a huge number of the informal sector that have seen the value of plastics, and we are being able to recover so much of it, lack of engagement with the informal sector causes that there's no support. There's a lot of plastic that is being collected, a lot of waste that is being collected, and no one knows exactly where is it facilitated. There's no infrastructure support. As you can see, we are doing the collections, but where do you house it? How do you transport it? We've been doing it for over 20 decades with no recognition. So it's very critical before we actually say we need to find sustainable solutions and start saying what exactly is happening on the ground. Before we start bringing international solutions, let's start looking at what's actually happening right now. Because if we continue making policies without engaging the informal sector, we're going to have a lot of unintended consequences, and a lot of families are going to lose their livelihoods. The importance of engaging with the informal sector is because they will tell you what's best. Business will tell you that, no, let's have infrastructure there, and reclaimers will tell you the opposite. We are the masters of separation of source. The amount of materials that we're collecting, that is very clean. Because we are educating residents, we are educating business on how to separate your organics from your plastics. Instead of finding other solutions, why don't we integrate into in a solution that's already there? This is a picture of some of the communities where there has been a very good process of educating of what we do, why we do it, how do you separate your waste, and it's properly separated from the organics. It has been a process where we don't really need to change the system. Let me change it. Maybe we need to integrate into the informal waste management system because it is working. Let us find ways of saying, yes, there's been problems. Yes, we have not engaged the informal sector in our cities. Let's start engaging the people that have been doing most of the collections. In South Africa, 80% of post-consumer packaging is already being collected by the informal sector. That is a very huge number. It deserves to be recognized, and it is about time we sit down and talk with the reclaimers and say, how do we change policy and make it a point that it benefits the entire value chain? For us to be able to say it's an inclusive circular economy, you need to have the informal sector sitting down on the table advising on how to do it. If you're going to talk about infrastructure support, you need to talk about the people that are doing the job on how to set up infrastructure support. If you need to talk about financing, you need to speak to the people that are doing the job, because you'll end up wasting billions of dollars on something that is not going to work. And we're seeing a lot of that in African cities, where a lot of tenderizing of the work that we're doing given to private companies who have no interest in recycling because they are being paid, all the plastic is being taken to landfill. Now with this informal system that is not costing anyone diesel, not costing anyone, but what is happening is that we are subsidizing the environment, we're subsidizing industries, we're subsidizing the government through a free labor system. So before we continue, yes, we can do the reduction of plastic, the reduction of waste to 50% in 2050. But if we're to integrate into this proper working system, it can be actually be done way before 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luyanda. Society and the planet owes you a debt of gratitude for all that you are doing. It's almost an unpaid service, no? As you've mentioned, the things that you're doing isn't costing the government, anyone, any centavo or cent. And you're doing all of this. You are materials experts, and waste education experts. And I think hopefully COP27 is an avenue for everyone to recognize the role that you are playing and to work towards inclusion rather than pushing for solutions that would undermine the amazing work that you are doing everywhere, not just in South Africa, but in all other parts of the world. So, given the limitation with time, we can only share 2 stories from Africa, but there are more amazing stories out there. My colleague Niven would be happy to link you to other groups in Africa who are doing amazing work. Now, let's go to Europe. And our first speaker for Europe is Iryna. And Iryna, my question for you is, how are cities in Ukraine working on zero waste and organics management to deliver the Paris Climate Agreement and build resilience despite the adversity that you are all facing right now?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here and speak from on behalf of Ukraine. At this difficult time, waste management is a little bit disregarded. But I'm going to tell you a story how we can learn from the events that are going on in Ukraine to become more resilient and to learn the better emergency response. Because what we will need in the future all over the world because of climate change, it's emergency response, unfortunately. Due to the climate change, due to adverse events. We learned in Lviv zero waste in a hard time. 5 years ago, the landfill that our waste management system relied on was in fire because of the methane. And afterwards, 4 people died. The landfill was closed, and the city of 700,000 population was left without basically waste management system. So we were thinking, what can we do what can we do with our waste, knowing that probably some infrastructure should be built in the future, but here and now. And that's how we learned about the waste cities approach. We did the study on the waste composition, and as in Tanzania, it's 50% organics. During the summertime and the autumn foliage, it goes up to 70. So the first thing to do if you need to reduce waste quickly is start with separate organic collection and composting. And last year, finally, the centralized composting was introduced in Lviv. But then the war came. And the war brought a lot of refugees to Lviv. Lviv is situated 60 kilometers from the Polish border. And in a couple days, the city grew to 2 million people, and this number of people stayed there till probably for a couple months. Can you imagine the amount of waste that amounts with this increase? And you have to manage it. Emergency bring the very special waste to the city, single-use plastic. Unfortunately, as a world, we hadn't learned how to provide food to people, to refugees, without using single plastic. And we are kind of jeopardize the future with the day-to-day solutions. But because we had been working with Lviv restaurants for the previous years, we established a good understanding how to use the need to go for reusables. And we learned how to actually provide food using the reusable containers. And residents of Lviv donated a lot of kitchenware to the shelters, and people were able to use them. It also showed that it can minimize the food waste, because once put it into single-use containers and distributed, it actually sometimes gets spoiled. Some people don't eat some items, and you get in this very time of crisis lots of food waste. So we did also morphology analysis for the shelters for people and provided them with reusable containers, and it really helped. Then about reusable cups. When a person leaves its home due to emergency and goes, people don't think about bringing their own bottle or their own reusable cup. But then they get onto the train and can stay there for 17 hours to get to the safer place. Then they arrive to the railway station in the middle of the night during the curfew. And what you get there? You get a drink in the single-use cup. So you have to, and when it's below zero temperature outside, you need quite a lot of warm drinks to have. So we propose to the refugees the thermocups so that they can take them with, from the railway station, from the first safe place they arrived, and go with the reusable solution and the hot drink inside for them and their children to other places. Now in Lviv we have about 200,000 extra refugees, mainly women and children. And of course the job situation and income situation is difficult. So we promote reusable sanitary products that on one hand are making sure that women have access to sanitary products they need, but at the same time they don't need to spend their money on single use. So zero waste solutions can actually bring more resilience into community, decrease amount of waste, and make waste management feasible and save money for very necessary things that you need to have in the most difficult times. But it's too late to go zero waste when the emergency is there. So please, start now and be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iryna, and our solidarity to the people of Ukraine. I have more questions after hearing you. I'm struggling with this. Should we, as a network of zero waste advocates, prepare for zero waste solutions to address and support war refugees? And if we do that, are we actually admitting that war is a reality in our world? I think that's a difficult question to answer right now. But the reality is, whether it's war or natural disasters, we need to provide emergency support to people who are impacted by this. So I think the challenge for us at this point is, how do you provide these refugees, these victims of natural disasters, without contributing to the same causes that what caused these disasters in the first place, like using single-use plastic, for victims of typhoons in the Philippines, for example. It's been an ongoing question for us. And lastly, last question for me is, if Ukraine, despite all these adversities dealing with war and occupation, can work towards zero waste, what's our excuse? What's the excuse of other cities? If Ukraine can do it, what's stopping other cities from exploring this as well? And as you've mentioned, we need to prepare even before war comes to us, and hopefully war doesn't come to us. So thank you again for sharing this amazing work that's happening in Ukraine. Next, we go to the UK. We have Richard. Richard, my question for you is, how are cities in the UK and elsewhere in Europe using zero waste and organics management specifically to achieve our Paris Agreement goals? What are the key opportunities for reduction and mitigation? Please.
Thank you very much, Froy. And the first slide, please. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes just talking to you about an example of a project we did with London to see what impact you could have by doing three things. One is by helping people eat more sustainably, eat more plant-forward foods. Secondly, by decreasing the amount of food waste they produce. And thirdly, increasing collection of food waste separately so that it can be put through recycling and anaerobic digestion. Next slide, please. So, how much food waste is produced in London every single year? 910,000 tons are produced. of which 640,000 tons of that could have been eaten. So that's the context. And so what we did is we focused our work on looking at to see if we could come up with simple messages that would help people eat more healthily, reduce food waste, and increase recycling. And we came up with a way of doing this called, next slide please, so small change, big difference. Small changes that we can all take within London and within cities that enables us to eat more healthily, more plant forward, and enables us to reduce food waste and indeed increase the recycling of those materials. So we selected parts of London that have separate food waste collections with an existing infrastructure that takes it to composting and anaerobic digestion, and the outputs of that went to agriculture in the local area around London. And what's fascinating, by researching small changes, big difference, we found that people really responded to this. They responded to this in terms of actually eating more plant-forward dishes on a regular week-to-week basis, and also actually by reducing food waste. One of the things I particularly loved was the sharing of videos across the city, videos from people saying, this is what I do to make a small change but a big difference. This is my recipe for using up leftovers. This is my recipe for making the best use of the bread that I've got in my fridge. And it was beginning to become a community response. Also, we had this idea of, in the local communities, of people getting together and actually bringing what they could find in the bottom of their fridges and using that to cook up meals that they could and eat together. So it was a bit of a community experience, as well as helping us eat more healthily and indeed reducing food waste. Next slide, please. So we did this in combination with another 11 cities across Europe. So following what we did and actually taking the insights from London and replicating them across Europe to give you a similar sort of impact. And next slide, please. So what did this effect have? Well, we're delighted to say over the 2 years of the project, we got an additional 9% reduction in avoidable food waste generated per household per week, and a 15% increase in Londoners demonstrating knowledge of and reporting taking action on healthy, sustainable eating, i.e. eating more sustainable food. Now, since we've done this work, we've also incorporated a campaign that helps us reduce food waste in hospitality and food service called Guardians of Grub. Check it out on the web. There's phenomenal tools that helps restaurants and hospitality and food service reduce food waste, measure and act upon that. And we've also been working with retailers, with food banks, with hospitality and food service sector to increase donation of food across London and indeed across the UK. This overall has helped the UK reduce its food waste from farm to fork by 27% since we started work in this particular area. So, can we change behavior in the homes? Can people eat more healthily and reduce food waste and recycle more? Yes, they can. Can that be replicated? Yes, it can. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing the amazing work that's happening in the UK and across Europe. I can't describe the feeling right now to realize that in some places, 2/3 of the organic waste that we throw away are actually edible food, right? In a world where more than 800 million people go to bed hungry every night, how can we afford to throw away this much food? No? And just look at COP, for example. When you go around here, this is not a place where we're actually walking the talk. No? A lot of food waste is still happening here within the COP venue and even in the parties that are being organized around COP. So definitely we have so much more to do on this. And maybe in the Q&A later, you could start by answering the question, how can we afford to throw away as much food when people are going hungry? No? Thank you again for our friends from Europe for sharing the amazing work that's happening there. And this despite all the challenges that you're facing right now. Now we go to Asia Pacific, and our next speaker is someone I've heard several times being referenced to in several reports in Asia, and I'm so excited to be sitting beside you now and hear from you directly. So Dr. Zaman, my question for you is, what key aspects of your research would you like to highlight for government seeking to build circular economies? What trends do you see stand out, and what should cities prioritize? please.
Thank you, Froilan. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah, thanks. I'm very excited to be here and to be part of this panel because this is the very first site sessions for COP ever on zero waste cities. And I would like to start by sharing my personal experience working or researching in zero waste cities. Because when I started my PhD a decade ago, and my well-wishers actually started to email me saying that, why you are starting to ruin your life because zero waste is never be possible to achieve. And I humbly replied to them and saying that, okay, I'm not studying thermodynamics, I'm not addressing that, but what I'm trying to achieve is to have a change or a social movement or system change that is needed for addressing global waste problem. So from that, I think, and I think I didn't make that mistake, like my decision was right to actually go ahead with zero waste cities studies and research and so on. And I think this side event is the example and proof that we are having this conversation after decades later on. So I think what has changed then, like, you know, in decades ago and now. So the concept of zero waste evolve and communities, industries, and even organizations are now looking into like what are the key benefits around zero waste and circular economy. And this is how kind of all community-led initiative has begun. So maybe I go with what is happening in Australian context because this is where I kind of representing today. So in Australian zero waste movement started with a very humble kind of legislation policy called container deposit legislation. And that started in South Australia in 1997. And where community can get 5 cents, now it's became 10 cents to every cans or bottles they return to their recycling depot. And the later it started with landfill levy in 1993, and also zero waste policy started in 1996 and 2001 by Capital Territory government and Western Australian government towards zero waste by 2010 and 2020. Even though those are not achieved, but those policies actually paved some of the zero waste kind of goal or circular economy goal that we are working on right now. And one of the notable kind of transition that happened in Australian context is establishment of zero waste SA, that now known as Green Industries SA, because zero waste SA started to develop a holistic zero waste strategy and action plan and milestone. So that's kind of paved the Australian whole process of notion of zero waste movement in Australia. So till 2018, it seems like we are doing well in Australian context, but when China imposed ban enact, then we realized that Australia is a very good waste collector, but not a good recycler, because most of our waste actually that we collect in Australia is sent to offshore, other countries, mostly in Asia. So then in 2020, Australian government actually start to waste export ban. That means like that gives us the opportunity to invest heavily in local infrastructures to capacity building, recycling, and also remanufacturing new product out of recycled content. I think this is really good opportunity for now in Australian context, not dependent on other countries rather than building our own capacity. So what we have learned so far from academic point of view is like, there are 5 areas that you need to actually focus or prioritize. First is like zero waste vision and strategy, and I think South Australia is one of the very good example if you look into Australian context, because they have very thorough strategy, action plan, and also kind of measurement of how we addressing those action plan. Then social incubations, and because social incubation and social participation is very important, and we have seen from Tanzania, African content, because even in developing country, when local authority is not providing the service they should be providing, but local community is taking that lead. So social incubations and actually nurturing that is very important to get a solution, because it doesn't matter whether it would be developed country or developing country, local community would have the best knowledge about their context, and they will come up with best solutions. So I would humbly say, like especially in developing country, I'm also part of developing country context. So don't follow like what is happening in developed country, rather than nurture what we have in the local context. And I think you presented that as an example, like what is happening other part of global south as well. Market is a very a crucial part of moving towards zero waste cities. The reason is like if we can't ensure end market for the recycled product, then we cannot promote that. So, and for that, I think it requires the partnership. So, partnerships in a sense of local government with private organization, with community, and also building that, like how can we ensure the end market for recycled product that we have. And finally, I would like to emphasis on access to zero waste data. That means like without data, and we have seen in various COP event is like data is not available, and especially in waste management sector is even absent. So how can you make a kind of best decision when you don't have any data? So that next slide, please. So that leads to the next options is like how can we integrate fourth generation of industrial regulation in waste management system. So one of the projects that we are keen to work in waste management for, we call like fourth industrial revolution in waste management. Can you please go next one? So that will show the video. So that gives, so this project we are trying to actually apply fourth industrial revolution is waste management. So what do you mean by fourth industrial revolution is waste management is we are trying to link our waste infrastructures like our waste bin, collection trucks, sorting facilities, and also a whole waste management system with a digital platform through RFID sensor and also AI machine learning application and so on. So this is one of the examples that we are trying to achieve, like identifying level of contamination in our waste collection system using machine learning technology. So this will allow us to give the access to the data that is needed. So those data is reliable first and accessible to 24 hours, and from that accessibility of data will give us a better decision making, whether it would be waste infrastructures or whether it would be policy decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zaman. I think one of the points that you've raised where most of us here in the room could relate is the need for data. Most importantly, credible data. No, I think that the question for us is how can we engage with the academe to help produce the data. No? Later we'll share with you our report, Zero Waste to Zero Emission, which has compelling numbers that would be useful in terms of engaging with our cities and local governments to connect the zero waste work that we're doing with our climate action. But again, I think we need more data out there, no? And maybe that's one area we could explore later during the question and answer portion. Now, just to add further on the Asia-Pacific context, I think many of us here in the room have been bombarded with the same messaging around Asia as the face of the problem when it comes to waste, landfill, plastic pollution. No, there have been dubious and questionable ranking that have been published before, which identified key countries, particularly in Asia Pacific, as the primary source of marine plastic pollution. No, and we are so used to this narrative where Asia, Africa, and Latin America have been blamed, no, for these problems. But what we're here to share with you is that, yes, there's amazing work happening in Europe with more than 300 municipalities working towards zero waste. We are all familiar with the stories of San Francisco and Berkeley in the US, who are models, no, for zero waste work. But as Anna and Luyanda shared with us this afternoon, there's amazing work that's happening in Africa. There's amazing work that's happening in Asia Pacific right now. More than 25 cities have been working with our members in GAIA, no, to implement zero waste program in their cities and communities. And these have been proven to be successful. In many cities in the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, they've achieved very high waste diversion rate, meaning via segregated collection, composting, and engaging with waste workers and waste pickers, they were able to divert as much as 80% of the waste that's generated within their community. And building on what you've shared, in many places, we have not quantified the climate impacts of these solutions. No? So we really need the data. Again, we have preliminary report, but more has to be done and to be put out there. But again, just going back on my first point, solutions are happening right now. and it's been proven. The challenge right now for many models in Africa and in Asia is how do we scale up? And a big chunk of the bottleneck here is financing or funding. No? Here in COP, we are asking for loss and damage. In our zero waste work, no, we're asking for resources to help scale up this work because this has been proven to work. This is good for the planet, good for the people, as Luyanda and millions of waste pickers and waste workers will tell us. And most importantly, the cost much less to implement compared to all the false solutions that are being peddled out there, like waste to energy or co-processing in cement kilns, or even less proven false solutions like chemical recycling. No? So our invitation for all of you is to reach out and listen to all of these stories that are happening on the ground, stories that have been told for quite some time but have not reached a wider audience. So hopefully through our session this afternoon and through other sessions in the future, we'll recognize the value of these stories that are proven not to be effective. Now let's go to the next part of our panel, the Q&A, and we'd like to invite everyone to raise your hand if you have a question. I think we have a microphone that could go around. And also for those who are following us via live stream, again, you can post your question by using the hashtag #ZeroWaste2ZeroEmission. Do we have a microphone ready? We have one question over here. Sorry. So maybe while we're, okay, it's here. The microphone is here. If you could please start by introducing yourself and then let us know who you're addressing the question. Over here, Marielle. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Lamin Sane from the Gambia. My question goes to her. I just want to know the main challenges that they are facing with working towards the zero waste management. That I want to know. The main challenges that they are facing with working towards the zero waste management. Thank you.
Is it for Iryna from Ukraine, you said?
Pardon?
Who are you addressing the question to?
Ha, the one with the white shirt.
Okay,
Yes.
Iryna.
Thank you.
The first challenge that we faced was actually the people don't believe into decentralized solution. Governments are pushing, intergovernmental organizations are pushing for this, like big infrastructure solution, and that looks serious. It costs tons of money, long discussion, and that is a solution. But when you propose something as simple as, much simpler and much more nature-based solution like separate organic collection and composting, but it's too simple. Everyone should do it. And so if no one is doing that, that probably is something that is not working. And it took us basically 2 years to prove that more nature-based solutions do work, and we should start and explore all the low-hanging fruits first before returning to the large infrastructure solution. And that's the thing that I would advise you. Start with separate organic collection, but also know your waste. Know where it comes from. Know the composition from households, from the markets, from the other entities, from schools in everything. And think, what can you do here and now, locally, regionally, and only then push it toward the governments. Because we see here on the climate large negotiation how slow the the larger the scale of the decision, the slower it goes. But at the community level, at the municipal level, we actually have power over our trash bins.
Thank you, Iryna. Richard, you wanted to add something, please?
And also just to add to that from what Iryna's just said, I think the critical thing is separate collection, and it's also prevention. And the interesting thing about separate collection is that we found that once you collect food waste separately, what it does, it shows us all the consequences of what we're doing in our homes. Because at the moment we don't see what we throw away because it gets hidden in the black bag. We don't see it. As soon as you separately collect it, we found that that in itself helps prevent food waste in the first instance. So there's that linkage. But don't just think about preventing food waste. Think about preventing all waste as a component part of it. Once you separately collect the organics, that gives you an opportunity to turn things into products. We've heard about black soldier fly. We've heard about anaerobic digestion that generates biogas and a fertilizer that goes back to land. And we've heard about composting. All of those create jobs, and all of those are about keeping the organics going. And it makes the quality of the recyclates better because you're separating out the dirty stuff from stuff that then you can use that's clean. So these are key criteria. And my final point is you can also link this to other objectives. And you can link it to healthy eating as well, as our research shows. So you can even go further in that low carbon solution.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Toronon Severin Toro from Mali, the founder of EI, Environmental Education and Empowerment. Thank you so much for this presentation and your interventions. Thank you so much. My question is that for Luyanda. So when it comes to addressing your solutions, presenting your solution to the local community, so how do they receive your ideas? Thank you.
Can you please repeat it? I didn't hear it clearly, sir.
Yeah, so when you go to explain your ideas, your solution in the communities, how people in those communities you are working, how do they receive your solutions?
Thank you. It starts with educating. That's one aspect that everyone is not looking at. No one is educating about waste. No one is educating about separation at source. So there's a lot of funding going to infrastructure, going to all these things, but the core part of it, of educating, is the one that is being neglected. So the more we start educating on what is recyclable, what is not recyclable, how do you separate, it actually starts creating that engagement, it starts creating that partnership, which leads to very good collaborations that are on the ground. And most of them we see that they when they start, there's not much funding because there's that personal engagement that happens and people start understanding, which opposes the direction that most of business and government are doing of putting money up front, and you end up misusing the money because people don't understand separation at source. You're definitely misusing it. So the element of educating everyone in the value chain, we need to educate business, we need to educate retail shops, we need to educate everyone in the value chain so that by the time we are able to put funding in it, it is actually working already. The localized solutions are based on education. Those are the ones that create positive and collaborations that are actually worth more and would last more time than the ones that are less educated.
Thank you, Luyanda. Yes, please. The lady in the middle.
Hi, thank you. My name is Arthi Ananthanarayanan and I'm from Ocean Conservancy. I really appreciate this panel here today because it was so inspiring to actually hear solutions and innovation coming from the ground. I'm wondering, as countries are starting to make climate commitments and meet those, we don't hear about the waste sector very much, and I'm wondering kind of what are some of the commitments you'd like to see at the country level to help the work that you're doing on the ground?
I think that's a question for everyone. Anna, would you like to start, and then we can hear from the others after?
Yes, I would love to start. I think one of the things here is that when we talk about the climate, people still don't see the connection between climate and waste, and also don't realize that addressing the waste problem is probably the easiest way to address the climate problem. So the connection is relevant, but it's also tangible, and we can actually take action to do this. And so when you think about the country level and how we should be able to implement this, what we need is political will to help all the zero waste modeling that is happening to spread out, to reach more communities, to reach more people, so that we can basically increase the scale. In a country like Tanzania, for example, one of the things that we do have that enables the zero waste to be implemented, that has been mentioned here, is that by policy, people are supposed to do segregation at source. Beautiful to say, but also we need to remember that we are talking about a country that lacks infrastructure when it comes to waste collection. So people don't do segregation at source, one, because they don't know how to do that, but also because even if they do segregate the waste at source, they don't have segregated collection, and so it doesn't really make any sense. And so the integration between what the policy says and what is being implemented on the ground is a fundamental piece for zero waste to actually be able to be implemented in the whole country, and for us to be able to see the results that I just presented on in certain low-income communities to become the results of the country as a whole, and to achieve the 65% greenhouse gas reduction that I just also showed and that the report details.
Thank you. Iryna?
We don't hear a lot about waste here, but waste is something that is much more recognizable by people around the world as an environmental problem than climate change, and that it's something that can actually empower. What the COP can do for that? First of all, let's start with the methane. Here we have heard how methane is the third largest contributor to the methane emissions, and most of it comes from the food waste. A lot of events had been held here about the food security. So that's how it links all together. And having more ambitious targets on the not voluntary methane pledge, but actually having more considerate contribution from countries, not following then false solutions like we will reduce methane by incinerating, say, but through anaerobic digestion, through the composting would be one thing. The other thing today is the fossil fuel phase out day, and if we can phase out fossil fuel from all unnecessary single-use plastic, that would be the second thing. So on the production side, countries should have more ambition there. But also what I'm here at COP more and more, that around the globe, cities have much more ambitious climate pledges and plans there, but somehow it is disconnected from their governments. So probably we need to hear more from communities here, from cities here, and their solutions should be at the heart of the climate policies around the globe.
Thank you, Iryna. Dr. Zaman first, and then I go to others.
Thank you. I think this is a very good questions and important question to clarify some of the misconceptions about why waste is not related to climate agenda and so on. I think waste, when you talk about waste, even zero waste and circular economy, people perceive or policymakers would say, oh, this is end of life waste. But this is not. Zero waste is not about managing our end of life waste that we actually generate at a household level. It's more than that. It's about like whole supply chain and recirculating materials within the system that we talk about. Now, if you bring that in the climate or greenhouse gas emission agenda, then waste has a greater role to play, and actually it should recognize that. So I give you one example. We now talk about net zero emissions target, and mostly scope 1 and scope 2 emissions target that most of the organization would be going for. But scope 1 and scope 2 only address 10% of global greenhouse gas emission. 90% is actually related to supply chain. Okay? So when you talk about zero waste would be talking about the whole supply chain related emissions. So actually, circular economy and zero waste has that important role to play in the 90% of greenhouse gas emissions. But it's never been translated to that rather than say, oh, it's end of life waste. It's only contribute 3 to 5% in the global greenhouse gas emissions. Thanks.
Richard?
I think this is an absolutely critical question. How do we link the waste side of the agenda with the climate agenda? So let's give some examples. One of the key areas is food. Around a third of all global greenhouse gas emissions comes from the food system. Therefore, using cities as a way of driving change on that, reducing food, making the best use of edible food that's around, and then actually recycling what you can't use can make a big difference. Just food loss and waste accounts for between 8 and 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So to put it another way, if food waste was a country, and it would be a pretty horrible and smelly country nonetheless, but if it was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. So what could it call upon countries to do is in their NDCs reflect this. Put in there SDG 12.3, for example, which is halving food waste and reducing food loss, and making that a key part of it. It's also about minimizing waste, SDG 12, and recycling more, and recycling into high added value markets that creates jobs for people, that actually puts the materials back into the economy. Plastic bottles back into plastic bottles, for example. Collecting textiles separately and actually reusing those textiles rather than casting them into landfill. And building on Iryna's point, this actually also tackles one of our big challenges at the time, methane emissions from landfill, which comes from particularly from food waste. So let's prioritize this. Let's put this into the NDCs because this is a low-hanging fruit that we can make a difference on quickly.
Thank you, Richard. Luyanda, please.
I think from the retailer's perspective is number one, meaningful engagement, not a tick box exercise. We need to engage everyone in the sector because just transition that we're talking about here at COP is a definition of what business and government is saying. We have not defined what just transition is for civil society. We have not defined what just transition is for the waste collectors. Proper, meaningful engagement. We need to be involved in the decision making. We need to be able to be involved in the policy changing. There's a lot of policies that need to be changed, and we need to change the stigma on waste, and people need to be educated on waste. Most of business and government are not as investors as we are on waste. So it is very critical that government needs to start investing on programs that are happening on the ground, research-driven programs that are currently happening. What's happening in Germany may not necessarily happen in Nigeria. We can't do a cut and paste exercise. We need to be able to go to research-driven things that have proper information and data that will be sustainable.
Thank you, Luyanda. Any other questions? Do we have time for one more? Yes, please. Here in front, Marielle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My last question is that how can we maintain zero waste management? How can we maintain zero waste?
Anna, want to take that?
I think the first thing that we need to do is that we need to achieve the zero waste, and I think that comes from two things. I think one of them is what we have all been presenting on, which is all the management opportunities that are there to implement segregation at source, to have cooperatives leading, especially in the Global South, having cooperatives leading waste collection, to have all the organic waste being returned to the soil where it belongs by composting. Not spending money and also spending increasing emissions by transporting organic waste to a landfill or to a dump site. But I think there is another portion here as well, which is the policy portion, which I think is what we are all gravitating around here, and the COP has a lot to do with that, which is actually have policies in place that do not allow corporations to produce things that are bad for us, for the environment, and that create waste. And that goes with the fossil fuels. That also goes with plastic production. And so some of the waste that we see being produced or being consumed at the local level is actually being produced by very rich companies that need to stop producing that kind of waste so that the entire waste management chain is manageable at the local level, at the country level, and managed across the globe by Global South and by the Global North as well.
Yes.
Hi, thanks everybody for this great panel. I'm Frank Hornstein from Minnesota in the US, and I know a lot of municipalities have zero waste plans or zero waste planning process, but they also include incinerators. And I'm wondering your thoughts about that. Obviously I know that here at GAIA, that's mutually exclusive, and I just wanted to get your reaction. Again, because it seems to be incorporated in the planning process for zero waste, which doesn't make sense to me.
Iryna, you'd like to?
It doesn't make sense. Because once you learn the waste composition, once you understand how much organic food is there and that it's not wise to burn organic waste, in any case, once you learn how much recyclable material, high-value recyclable materials are in the waste, you are left with kind of handful of waste, which is basically is not the waste that can be diverted. And it's very irresponsible from the city level officials to put today, when we know about climate change, when we know about the plastic pollution, when we know about necessity of actually scale down the general resource consumption on this planet, when we reached 8 billion people yesterday on this planet to waste resources on incinerator. There are much better options, much far thinking into the future options, like composting, like waste prevention, like reuse and repair. We haven't touched on that today, but it's also a big opportunity for job creation. So whenever the government is talking about incinerator, even with waste to energy, this person is not thinking clear and through.
To add on that, in Africa, there's not really much difference between incineration and open burning. It's just a different wording. It's the same thing. It is not practical in Africa. It's going to be a waste of a lot of money. Unfortunately, the taxpayers are the ones that have to pay for it at the end. Politically, it's just a quick solution. The landfills in South Africa are beyond capacity because they were not planning, because there's a constant change of governance. The government that's making the decision now doesn't necessarily mean the one afterwards is going to work. So it's definitely a waste of resources, a waste of land, and Africa is going to feel the pain immediately when these incineration processes go through. What's important is for us that are aware of it to educate and make it a point that it does not happen.
I'd like to add something to that. I think when you think about incineration, what we are thinking about is keeping the structures that are already in place. Incineration is about concentration of wealth, centralization of waste management. It's about, when you talk about a just transition, and I have for a very long time, I have had an issue with that expression, just transition, and I didn't really know why. And I think I came to the realization about why during this COP. Because when you talk about transition, we are talking about something that is transitory, so it's not permanent. And justice needs to be permanent. We can't talk about a transition that is just. We need to talk about the outcome being just. And an outcome that is just needs to include people, needs to generate employment for people, needs to include livelihoods that people can have a nice life on. And incineration doesn't bring any of that. Incineration concentrates money on the hands of few, while a lot of people that could be actually engaged in the waste sector and make a livelihood out of it are kept on the side, are thrown on the side. And so I think what we need to kind of take these conversations towards is not just about how we do a just transition, but it's how do we achieve a just outcome for this transition, which means a just road in the end.
Thank you, Anna. We are almost at time, so I'd like to invite our panelists to give your closing statements. But if you could include two things in your closing statement. One, if you could share with everyone what are some of the biggest threats that your zero waste work is facing right now. And second, what's your call to action for everyone who are here at COP or back to your governments at home? Let's start with Atiq, and then let's go to the left.
Thank you. I think the biggest threat would be misconceptions, especially like when you hear about like waste incineration is part of circular economy solution or zero solution, because that shouldn't be part of that sort of solution, because we are thinking of holistic. If there is a problem with the design, we need to change the design so that we can actually make a better solution rather than burning the resource that we have. But in relation to what is the key message, because especially researching in this particular area, what I kind of realize is like we're still talking about recycling. Yes, recycling for organic waste and methane, that's fantastic. This is that we need to do. But in terms of non-organic, we need to go beyond recycling. So how can you actually capitalize, reuse, and also redesign so that actually our material would be circulating within the system? And this is where we need to put our emphasis and our effort on. And still, I think we need to go beyond recycling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atiq.
I think the threat that we face in the zero waste work is basically the work being undermined. And so what we see, and I think something that we see here at the COP frequently as well, is that we still have, talking about power structures, we still have countries and companies in the global north proposing solutions to the global south that actually allow them to make more profit and make more money, but that do not actually address the issues that we have in the global south. Incineration is one of them, and a lot of the waste management structures that the few waste management structures that have been discussed at the COP are actually including incineration and excluding the waste picker work and all the waste cooperatives and zero waste as an option for that. And so I think what we need to think about when we're thinking about a key message is that we basically have solutions that are from the global south to the global south, to problems that we didn't necessarily create, because a lot of these problems were not created in the global south, but we took action to address and to solve. And those solutions cannot be undermined by solutions that are more expensive, more fancy, but that do not actually solve our problem and that create other problems for the communities in the global south.
Yes, please.
The biggest threat to zero waste is waste. Waste of time. Because solutions are here. It's not some rocket science. We all can do it in our communities. And my call to action is actually go and talk to your communities. No, don't wait for the governments, for the world to act upon it. Start with your household. Take over your trash bin. Take over the trash bins of your communities. Start there and then walk it through.
Thank you, Iryna. Richard?
I think the threat is one of a missed opportunity. We produce an awful lot of materials that are currently not going out of the economy completely. By adopting waste prevention, by adopting reuse, by adopting remanufacture, by adopting recycling, we can bring these back into the economy. We can therefore put them to productive use and actually bring jobs into the community, save money, and critically also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So my call to action is, let's prioritize this. Let's put this in the NDCs. Let's think in terms of zero waste, prevention, circular economy as being one of the key ways we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, and do it in a way, and this is where I completely agree with previously, do it in a way that's appropriate to the economy that they're working in. You know, we're not talking about one-size-fits-all answers here. We are talking about local solutions, but in the context of delivering zero waste across the world.
Thank you, Richard. Luyanda?
Final comments. The amount of plastic amount of waste that is being disposed in Africa is not produced in Africa. Maybe we don't need to have really incinerators. We need to change policies and redirect how we are thinking. They may have made the decisions of processes going forward on their definition of zero waste. We need to be able to shift the goalposts and be able to change policies and make it a point that Africa is able to treat itself and not wait for other countries to come and find solutions for ourselves, which will actually lead to unintended consequences.
Thank you so much, Luyanda. And for all of you out there who are still unclear on the connection of waste and climate, we invite you to check GAIA's report. The first one is Zero Waste to Zero Emission. We have the link here to download the report. And also Methane Matters. Now, these two reports would provide us more insights and data to be able to better connect our work on zero waste and climate. And if you or your city is interested to implement zero waste, we have another report, the Zero Waste Master Plan, which is a useful tool for you to be able to see how this can be implemented in your city or in your community. So we are at time. I'd like to thank again. It's been an honor to moderate this panel with these amazing speakers. Thank you, everyone. Can we give them a round of applause, please? So just to share some of the activities that are coming up, there's a session on waste diversion and segregation, a huge opportunity for methane mitigation, and a challenge for ambitious public policy and subnational implementation. That's on Thursday. Also on Thursday is scaling up local voices and solutions from urban informal settlements, governance and finance models that advance climate justice and urban resilience. The third one, Methane Matters, delivering on global methane pledge for ambitious methane mitigation. And another one on methane from waste sector, opportunities and challenges to deliver the global methane pledge. So we invite you to join these sessions and learn more how we can fully integrate zero waste in our climate conversations. With that, thank you everyone. Have a good afternoon and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.